So I'm here tonight talking about the Lunar New Year, and it's such a huge topic that I was trying to figure out how I come at it in a way that's going to be both educational and also just a little bit new and engaging. So I thought I'd talk about some of the changing traditions so that you can see where they came from, but also just how exciting they're being transformed in more recent decades. And just so that we're all starting on the same page, I am talking about the Lunar New Year, which is based mostly on the moon cycles, not completely because they are a little bit off from the sun, and so there will be an odd month thrown in every few years to catch us back up. And it's a 60-year cycle, which is based on 5 elements and the 12 animals, which I'm sure if you've been to a Chinese restaurant and seen the menu, you know about them, and so when they're matched up, it makes a 60-year cycle. This year is the year of the Earth Ox, and I don't know if anyone here is an ox. You have one ox in it. Oh, that's interesting. So you may know that oxes are very hardworking. They're steady. They're patient and calm. They're known for their strength and dependability, and making decisions by instinct more than analysis. And the story of the ox in that cycle, it's the second animal in the cycle of the 12 animals of the zodiac. And there's a funny little story about how the animals came in. And quickly, it was when Buddha attained enlightenment, the animals of the world were invited to pay their respects. And the first 12 animals that arrived were the ones that were given a zodiac within the year cycle. And the ox would have been first, except that the rat's very shrewd. Hi, come on in. No, please. I think they're just right here. So the ox was in the lead, he thought, but the little rat, he was also a very hard worker and also very shrewd and knows not only working hard but working smart, was riding on his shoulder, so that at the last minute he just like jumped ahead and got to be the first one to bow to Buddha. So the ox. Another interesting legend, which I thought I'd tell you to sort of tie into our food theme, is how the ox, who was a star in heaven, came down to earth to become an animal to work with humans. And long ago, when the world was still working itself out, the Jade Emperor looked down and saw that people were working really hard. They didn't have much to eat, and they were just, it looked like they're kind of just like barely making it by. And he wanted to reassure them that it's okay. So he sent his messenger, the ox, and he told them, you know what, tell them that don't worry, if they work hard for 3 days, then they'll be able to eat for a day. So, just keep to the grindstone. And so the ox goes down. He got a little confused, and so he told the people who were really excited to get a decree from the Jade Emperor that they would be able to eat 3 meals a day. And then when the ox got back to heaven, the emperor was very, very upset. He's like, you told them we got all this food, and we actually don't have this much food. So as punishment, you are now going to have to go back to earth and stay there and work to make sure that these people can make the food that you've promised them. So that's sort of the story of how it is that we've got this ox, which is very, very much a part of food in Asia as a water buffalo or as a dry land ox. So now to get into the food itself part of Lunar New Year, which is very much a family-oriented holiday, and it's often said it's kind of like Christmas and New Year's and Thanksgiving and Easter and birthdays all rolled into one, and it kind of is. And it's a time when families will travel very far to be together again, traditionally, and it's still really the most important holiday. In addition to family, you meet with your friends. There's a lot of exchanging of food, and you make food to give to each other. It's also, just sort of a side note, a time to settle debts. And some countries, for example, in Vietnam, if you didn't get your payment by the new year, it was forgiven. So people were like madly trying to, get their money that was owed to them. And you also are giving out money. You're probably familiar with the red envelopes that are given to kids or to younger people. So with all this money flowing around, it's also a huge time for gambling. So if you can imagine, like in the old days, the Lunar New Year would last 2 weeks. I mean, it was, or if not a month. And it was a time of rebirth, because it's actually literally the spring festival. Actually, let me go back really quick. So let me just make sure to make the point that it really originally is a quiet family holiday where you're getting together and just kind of hanging out, drinking, eating, gambling. You've cleaned your house, you're at rest. But yet, we now think of it, and the public view of Chinese New Year now, especially in the West, is this like really loud and rambunctious and huge and public, and these parades and these festivals and firecrackers and costumes, and it is that, it really is. It's very exciting, and I kind of want to look at how that happened a little bit. Some of it for historical reasons, some of it circumstantial, and some of it because it's just kind of fun, New Year, as we know it here, especially in Northern California, where the Dragon Parade really was first established, is distinctly Asian American. Quickly, 1880s, you have Chinese sojourners and Chinese workers kind of missing the homeland, so they send for a dragon to be made. And this little town that was known for making costumes for opera, the opera singers. So that's where we kind of get that look. Dragons weren't really made like this. You had lion dances, but not necessarily like this. And it was really, you can see here, this was before Chinatown was destroyed in the fires and earthquakes, or really in the fires. So it hasn't quite acquired that kind of Orientalist look. Fast forward 4 years, and now we've got this fabulous Chinatown, with these cool peaks and temples, and this exciting new dish called chop suey that everyone's just like raving about. And did you know they had this dragon? I mean, if you go, it's like so fun. So you can see it becomes a celebration, not only for an intimate family gathering, but really it's about entertainment too, and about reassuring a public that, we're not just a vice district anymore, we're not prostitutes, we're not gamblers, we're just like normal people. Like, we even have a Miss America or a Miss Chinatown pageant. We are nuclear families with girls, and we speak English. And pageant was actually a fairly large part of Chinatown festival during the 50s, post-World War II era, where they were really trying to change the stereotypes of Chinatown, and during this whole prosperity period. Still important, this is Cindy Wu, who was just crowned a couple of weeks ago. 70s happening, feminism, maybe not so, not so as popular as it once was. I'm just bringing it up to show how you have these traditions that change depending on the context. And we don't think of the Chinatown, the Miss Chinatown pageant as big a deal as it used to be. It's really the parade for us. But these things shift over time, because of kind of what's happening around them. Lion dance is another tradition. Does come more directly from China. And a lot of people confuse the lion with the dragon. The dragon's very long. I mean, the one in San Francisco now is about 300 feet. And lion's 2 people. And it's a very specific role of bringing good wishes to businesses, to new businesses that are opening. And there's this tradition of, I don't know if you can tell, but there's money and red envelopes that are tied to lettuce or to greens. And the idea is that the lion comes, and there's this little playful game, and he's looking for the money, and then he eats the greens, and he gets the greens, and what he does is he like kind of spits it back out at you. And if you get hit by the greens, kind of like at the wedding, if you get the bouquet, it's like good luck if you kind of want to be showered with all that green. And it came out of a tradition of martial arts, kind of. And you had to be very strong and nimble and limber and fit to be able to, the lion head is fairly heavy, especially in the old days when it was bamboo. It was made out of wood. Now it's like aluminum, it's a little lighter. Now you have it like YMCAs and community groups, and it's kids, and so you don't hang the lettuce in like places where you're trying to challenge them. In the old days, you'd hang the lettuce way up because you kind of want to make them work for their money, you know. Now you just put it in a little bowl and give it to the kids, and it's going to go to the Chinese hospital or the Y or to, you know, some community group, some nonprofit. And if you look really closely, you might even give the kids some bubble tea. I love that. There's a little thing of bubble tea in there. So so a little bit different, but it's still being done. If you go to Chinatowns or if you go to areas where there are Asian businesses, this actually is still something that's done, and they're bringing in good wishes for the year for the businesses. Now, you take this to Malaysia or to Singapore and increasingly to Taiwan and Hong Kong in the 70s. And someone like one day thinks, you know, let's pump this up a little. I'm going to put up some poles, some wooden poles, maybe 5 of them. I'm going to call them Plum Trees, and we're going to make the story of the, you know, the lions kind of climbing up there. So a guy does that, and it gets kind of popular. The audience likes it, so other people start copying it. Now it is a competitive sport, and now the poles are not 5 feet high; they're 50 feet high. Now you have 2 lions in complex choreography, and maybe up to 4 lions, and so it's become this thing where it's not just a New Year thing. You can see this sort of these spectacles through the year. And it's taken off. And I find this really interesting. And they've created narratives. Like what the lions are doing are, if they're not climbing in plum trees, then they're sort of out in the water in a fishing village. And this is the pier. So they've created this tradition. And this is really looked forward to. People are doing it now. And I love it. I love how that's kind of like come out of this response to something. I mean, some people might be cynical and say, "Oh, that's way commercialized." But you know what? A lot of traditions are. Now let's get back to the roots of Spring Festival. In agricultural period, you would be really excited after a long winter, and as a farmer, you might be looking forward to a summer of you wanting abundance. And so flowers are a huge part of New Year. And this is the flower market in Vietnam, in Hanoi, I think. And it's bang mai is a yellow one, and traditionally it's some sort of prunus blossom, like maybe apricot or plum. And here we see quince blossoms more, and we also see forsythia as a stand-in for the bang mai. And I grew up in Missouri, and let me tell you, in January and February, there is not even forsythia. So my mom would make us take yellow crepe paper, and my sister and I, and we would sit there and cut little bitty yellow blossoms, and she'd make us twist them and then glue them to like branches that we picked out from the yard, and we put them in. And if you took, 6 feet back, it looks pretty good. So that's like slave labor. But anyway, fortunately I live in Northern California, and I can get flowers now. And this is just, I just put this up to kind of let you know. I want to give you sort of the sense that traditions are very individual, because, if you grew up in Missouri and you don't have Chinatown around you, and your mom kind of not really is Buddhist, but kind of feels guilty about not doing something, but kind of forgot how to make that dish. And so, like your family starts creating these traditions, but they become extremely meaningful to your family. And it is for no one else to tell you you're not doing something that's, that's worthy of the holiday. And then you might, move to California and you're overwhelmed by the number of Asian people around you. And oh my God, I can buy a pomelo. My mom used to tell me that in Asia the grapefruit were this big, and I didn't believe her until I came to California. I was like, oh my God, my mom was right about everything. And you might marry into a Chinese family. Like, your parents are a little worried, but that's okay. They get used to it. And they figure, even though you live in California, they're still going to mail you little rice cakes, and just in case, candied coconut, because it's all about sweetness. My mom still makes peanut, this has come a couple of years ago, she makes her secret peanut brittle. And it's really good, and now it's gotten so bad that she mails them to my husband and me in separate containers with my names on them, because one year my husband ate them all, and I was very upset. My mom only makes this once a year. So sweets are a huge part of the New Year, and we take that for granted. It's kind of like fruitcake. It's like, oh God, there's that there's that, sweet little things that you get so tired, especially because they're commercial now. And they're just not, I have to be honest, they're not as good as you make yourself. But just remember, there was a time when sugar was extremely rare and valuable. When one single slice of a dried tangerine would have been just an incredible luxury. And now we buy nuts, oh my God, they're shelled for us, they're measured for us, they're chopped for us, no big deal. But nuts and seeds were, when they were foraged and when they were wild, it was very valuable. So, big part of New Year's, and you see that on the table here. This is bánh trưng, which is Vietnamese, the fête, and it's the rice cake you have on your table. And it's supposed to be really fatty. You see that glistening? It's all about, fat and sugar, and you eat it with little pickles. And there's a little story behind that. I'll just do it really quickly, which is there was a king, and he was aging, and he said to his sons, the one of you who finds the most special food, he was obviously a gourmand, the most special food in the land will inherit my kingdom. So his sons, and there are a lot of them, they go off and they go fishing and for really big fish. They go up into the mountains and hunt the wild boars. And the youngest son, being the youngest son, was the poorest. And he actually worked his own land. So he goes home. He's like, what am I going to bring? And he looks around. He's like, I got some banana trees. I'm growing some rice. I'll make a couple of cakes. So all the sons come back to court. They're presenting their elaborate dish, and each one is like more special than the one before. And they get to him, and he puts down these two rice cakes. One's square and one's round. And he's almost laughed out of court. And his brother's like, oh my God, like, what are you thinking? And his father, though, says, I'll give him a chance. Why these cakes? And so the idea is that the round represents the sky. It's pure. It's rice. There's bananas and trees and life involved in that. The square one is of the earth, the shape, as well as the fact that it's going to have pork in it. And so the king thought about it. He's like, you know what? I kind of like that. That shows some wisdom. It shows some inspiration, but also it's food that everyone can have. It's not an elitist food. So that particular son actually inherited the kingdom. And so sometimes there's peanuts, sometimes there's nuts. You can see it. This is bánh tét, which is in the south. And that kind of refers to a string, kind of like this breaking apart. Because the first 3 days of the new year, you don't use scissors or very superstitious. Everything's like symbolic or something, because it's going to cut your luck or, So most people don't do that these days. But turns out also that string is just the best way to cut sticky rice, too. And this is made with, you can see it's hanging up there. In the old days, you're not supposed to cook for 3 days either. It's all, really, you're supposed to do all this in advance because, once those fireworks go off and it's midnight, you're just going to sit around and eat and drink and gamble and talk and laugh and through the night, and you're not going to be cooking, and you're not supposed to be cooking. So that doesn't mean people aren't working like crazy before then. But, so these are meant to, there's a natural preservative. It cooks for a long time, like 8 to 10 hours. And my grandmother used to hang them in the she had a dark room that was cool, and they would hang, and they would be preserved for a week, and you would eat that through the week. Here's a square one. You can see there's a little form. Nowadays, most people, when you go to the store, you're going to get a square one. They're easier. They're a little bit more manageable, especially easier to make in bulk. Then you really need the bamboo strips to make the round ones because they're kind of like pipe cleaners. You put them around and you twist them, and it's set. And you try and do that with string, and it's just impossible. So so round ones you don't see so much. So it's kind of special that we got round ones tonight. I like that. You eat it with whole hard-boiled eggs, which if you raise chickens, know that it would take a long time to collect this many eggs. You can't just go to the store and buy a dozen, right? So you would have been collecting these eggs to the hard boil. The fattiest pork that you can find. You cook it for a long time, and this is sort of a sweet caramelized dish. It's often sold as like clay pot pork or clay pot blah 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 in the Vietnamese restaurants. And you make a big pot of this, and everyone sits around eating that. For my Chinese family, I started learning about the Chinese dishes, and this is from a Cantonese. The more in the south is eaten, and I think we're gonna have some tonight too. It's a vegetarian meal. It's the first meal of the day, and all these auspicious, symbolic foods, they all mean something, and it's all on the homonym. It's wealth or health or long life or and it's vegetarian because theoretically you're trying to start the new year. And a lot of the New Year traditions and some of the food we'll see later, it's about cleansing, it's about a little sense of purity, it's about, you know what, it's kind of like the whole resolution, you know, that you have in the West, where I'm gonna try, at least for one meal, not to kill an animal. Although some families, I have to say, have been known to put oysters in this because they just can't resist. It means good things, and it's supposed to be good. But another tradition is dumplings, which we have a lot of. This is in the north region, the north of China, and this is something that's going to be spread to many other. And you have gyoza in Japan, you have momos in Tibet, you have dumplings pretty much in every Asian country. And one of those things, again, you've gathered a lot of people. Not one of those dishes you want to make by yourself, like a lot of beef dishes, and you think, my God, how do they do it? It's because they had 50 people in the house, you know. And it was something. This is from some photos from New York. I just came back from New York from my husband's family, and they had. We had a family that we really hadn't seen them in a long time. We had cousins we hadn't seen in years around a table. And they'd never actually, except for one person who never made dumplings. And so here I was, I'm like, okay, let's make them. Because, I don't know, I love dumplings, and I love making them. They're just so gratifying. And they're quite easy, actually, you know? I mean, it's just, people are intimidated. And the whole thing, it's like kneading bread. You're sitting around, there's a spiritual component in the community of it. And I think that's something that's kind of lost. I mean, like, you know what? Most families just go out on the weekend and have dim sum for New Year's now. And knowing how much work goes into this, I mean, a lot of women dreaded the holidays. You know, they had to clean the freaking house. They had to, like, sew clothing. They had to cook. And it was not a time for them, you know? So, you know what? I can totally understand not having to make all this yourself. But one or two dishes, you know, keep it in the family. And honestly, sitting around for 2 hours making little dumplings, we talked in a way that we just don't. In fact, we made an appointment for dim sum. Parking was so bad, one of the people actually didn't even ever got into the meal, you know. And so I'm not sure that the restaurant was even that much easier. Looks supposed to look like a gold ingot. That's the little symbolism of it. So dumplings are going to carry me over to Tibet, Lhasa. And I really haven't been talking about the religions because I don't have time. But I did want to make a point that it's just not only about food. There's prayers. There's whether it's to your ancestor, whether you do set an altar. You might meditate. You might visit a temple and walk around it many times thinking. And before I get into the food of Tibet, I want to again set some context as far as the landscape and thinking about, you know, what they had access to, how they lived, either as nomads, and even when they had a permanent home, a stone home, they might still live in their tents for half the year to graze their cattle. The only thing that grows at this altitude is barley, as far as starches are concerned, and that river will be frozen 6 months out of the year, solid. So when we talk about what is special food for this kind of a life, you'll see the difference. And yaks are big. I throw in the yak because it's the year of the boar. I'm sorry, the year of the ox. And when I traveled in Central China or Central Europe, God, I can't tell. Central Asia, and far, far west of China and the borders of Tibet and Sichuan. It was in the depth of winter. And when we rode the buses, people would just lug these big cuts of meat right onto the bus, you know, and it would be an eighth of a yak. And it would just, fortunately it didn't take a seat. They would just put it right on the floor. And one bus, I remember, I'm thinking, something's not right, because as I was getting on the bus, I kind of smelled the meat. And And I look in, and the whole aisle is just like big cuts of meat, and we actually have to literally step on it to get into our seats. But it's frozen solid because it's so cold there. And they actually might even eat it that way. So yaks are bred with domestic cattle to make a hybrid that they can milk. And so dairy is a huge part for calories and for sustenance. And so you see butter up at the top with a very famous, yak butter in the tea. And butter is also sacred. You'll see in the bottom, you see a monk who's creating a little sculpture. And for New Year's, it'll be much bigger. And Sambal is our daily meal. It's the barley that's been roasted slowly, and it's ground. And then what happens is you drink your tea, and you leave a little bit in your bowl, and you add some Sambal. And there's this like beautiful kneading motion that happens with the bowl and the hand and the palm, and you make kind of this dough with it, and that's put into small bits and eaten. And that might be your only meal. I mean, that might be the only thing that you eat, and you will eat it every day, possibly. For now, we get to New Year's. So New Year's, you would get wheat flour, possibly. Right, it was a little bit more expensive, it'd be imported. And then you deep fry, because oil is just so special. Oil is I always like to say, I like deep frying. I like to say that it was the pinnacle of technology, because you had to learn how to refine it, you had to have high heat, you had to have the metal vessels, like anyone can boil, but not every civilization can fry. So frying was, like there's so many fried foods. And we take it for granted now, because deep fat frying is nothing now. But spring rolls, egg rolls, a lot of the Indian sweets and treats, we're eating once a year, possibly twice a year. Very, very rarely. So this bread is made during the New Year, and it's shaped many different shapes. You exchange it with your friends and your family. You can see little piles being made, and you might also, the traditional shape is on the right, and you might actually put little gifts into it and give to someone, as well as put it on the altar. Momos, which is the Tibetan version of the dumpling. And because of the proximity to India, and because quite often, we have now a very large number of Tibetans living in Darjeeling in northern India. So there's been a lot of crossover. And the momos are served sometimes with a cumin tomato broth, or almost like a rasam, or with a chutney, and really nice. It's also a dumpling dish in which you put your fortune. It's called like a fortune. It's the nine fortune soup. And I'll go back, actually. It's actually about that. And everyone would get a big extra dumpling in addition to their other dough, and it would have maybe a piece of wool, or a little white pebble, or a piece of butter or salt, and each of those represented something, some good, some bad, and that was supposed to forecast your year. Now they can sort of resort to written messages. So let's do a quick flight over to Korea and see how it was. Korea's had a much more Confucian influence, and it definitely shows in some of the sort of the structure of how it's done. Again, this is very traditional, and I'll talk a little bit more about what's happened. As far as, it's also Lunar New Year, but often in Korea now it's the January 1st is celebrated, and some of those traditions have been moved over to January 1st. And also depending on whether your family converted to Christianity, whether they grew up here in the U.S. I mean, all these things sort of temper that. But what I'm going to talk about first is kind of some of the older traditions, in which you wake up on the first day, and it was very much about cleansing too. This is an altar set out to the ancestors. A lot of these traditions predated religions, whether it was Buddhism or Christianity. And so with the Sampa, with the Tibetans, sometimes they would throw it up in the air on New Year's, and that was, you're sort of like blessing the spirits. And then that shows the animism, the influence of a lot of animist thought before that, before Buddhism. So you wake up, lots of days and days of work, a lot of food, all laid out, very, very particular order. The fish should be facing east, and the prunes and plums should be on the left, and there's wines and liqueurs to serve, and there are prayers, and then you get to eat it yourself. But before that, there's this sort of reveals a lot more of the Confucian influence in that definitely the sense of honoring the elders. And you get that in China, you get that in Vietnam, but it's almost joking. It's not quite so formal. And when I was in Korea, they spent hours showing me how to make sure I knew how to bow right, as a proper, because I was single then too. And so, like I had to learn how to do that right. And that it was, women bow differently than men or boys, and what you're doing is you bow to your elders, and still in the morning, and then you can get to eating. And there's a special rice cake, and it's kind of like mochi. I mean, rice is pounded, and then now it's extruded, but in the old days, I can't even imagine how hard this must have been to make. I have actually never attempted to make this on my own, because it is so easy to just go buy it now, like in this bag in Oakland even, and so but you can see like it's slicing it, and then it's a very simple soup, and we're going to have this tonight. It's chewy, it's very comforting. If you imagine how cold it was even then for a spring festival, and sometimes you'll have the mandu in it, but at its purest, it's just the little sliced rice cakes, and it's also the birthday soup, because in Asia you don't have birthdays, you have birth years. And that's a very Western kind of thing, or a more recent thing, to remember your birthday. And I didn't really have a birthday until I came to the U.S. And so at the New Year, everyone turned the next age. And so in China, on the 7th day, or and so this would be served. And once you ate this bowl, you were considered a year older. And you would only eat this during the New Year. So if someone asked you, how many bowls of what did you eat? You say, I ate 3 bowls, which meant you're 3 years old. Another thing in Asia is you're born 1 year old. They count the year in the years, almost. So everyone's a year older there. And before I'm past my time already, so I'll just do one more story of a dish that I love personally. And this is in Singapore and Malaysia. And very specific, also a recent invention. I think late 60s, early 70s, a restaurant decided to do this dish, and it, again, became popular. People liked it, it resonated, it had some meaning, and now it's traditional. And sliced fish very thinly, and raw, because fish is about it. The homonym for fish is abundance. And raw, I think, means wealth, or means even more, and so it's doubling the. And then you mix it with, if you've had the Burmese tea salad, or it's similar to, it's very Southeast Asian, it's layering of textures and flavors. And you have thinly shredded carrots and cucumber and daikon, and you've got some red pickled ginger in there, and deep fried garlic, and you have garlic oil, and you might have plum vinegar, and you have all these things. And then you put it on the plate separately, and then, and then what's supposed to happen is everyone gets their chopsticks, and then you go in and you all mix it together, and it's all about like spreading the good luck, and you're supposed to like make New Year wishes while you do it, and supposedly the higher your chopstick goes, like the more fortune you're gonna get, and so it's a very fun kind of like tradition, and then everyone eats it, and it really is one of my favorite dishes. It's very, very yummy, and completely syncretic, but now you'll find it, and it's considered a tradition. So, I think that's it for me now. But I do wish you a happy New Year.